Max had been part of the family for as long as Ben could remember. The little dog, with his floppy ears and wagging tail, had come into their lives when Ben was just a toddler. From the moment they met, it was as if they had been destined to be best friends. Life in the quiet suburban neighborhood was peaceful. But for Max and Ben, every day was an adventure. The backyard became their playground, a kingdom where they ran, played, and explored together. In the mornings, as soon as Ben woke up, Max would be at his bedside, tail thumping against the floor, ready to start another exciting day. And when Ben returned from school, Max would be waiting at the door, barking happily, as if they had been apart for years instead of just a few hours. Max was more than just a pet. He was Ben's shadow, his partner in mischief. They would chase each other around the yard, rolling in the grass until they were both covered in dirt. Sometimes, Ben would throw a ball, and Max would dash after it with boundless energy, his ears flapping as he ran. Other times, they would lie under the old oak tree, staring at the clouds, as Ben told Max stories about his dreams of becoming an astronaut or an explorer. And though Max couldn't understand every word, he listened, his dark eyes full of unwavering loyalty. At night, Max refused to sleep anywhere but at the foot of Ben's bed. No matter how much space he had in his own little dog bed, he always found his way onto Ben's blankets, curled up close for warmth. And Ben didn't mind. He liked the comforting presence of his furry friend beside him. Max wasn't just playful. He was protective, too. If anyone unfamiliar approached the house, Max was the first to bark, his little frame puffing up as if he were 10 times his size. He took his job as Ben's guardian seriously, standing between his boy and anything he deemed a potential threat. Even when it was just the mailman or a friendly neighbor, Max made sure Ben was safe. The seasons passed, and their bond only grew stronger. In the summer, they spent hours in the sun, running through the sprinkler or digging in the sandbox. In the fall, they leaped into piles of crunchy leaves, their laughter and barks filling the air. Winter was their favorite, though. Ben would build snow forts while Max happily bounced through the snowdrifts, leaving little paw prints behind. Ben's parents often smiled as they watched their son and his dog. "Those two are inseparable," his mother would say, shaking her head as she tried to sweep up the trail of muddy footprints Max always left behind. "He's not just a dog," Ben would argue, "he's my best friend." And truly, he was. Through every scraped knee, every bad day at school, every moment of laughter and adventure, Max was there. He was more than a pet, he was family. And in Ben's heart, he knew nothing would ever change that. The afternoon had started like any other adventure for Ben and Max. The air was crisp, the scent of pine filled the forest, and the golden sunlight filtered through the trees. This was their favorite place to explore, just beyond the backyard. A stretch of woods that felt like a whole new world. Ben loved finding new trails, pretending he was an explorer discovering uncharted lands. And Max was always right beside him, his little tail wagging, his nose sniffing every leaf and twig. They had done this 100 times before. Nothing had ever gone wrong. But today was different. As they played near a small creek, Ben bent down to pick up an interesting rock. "Look at this, Max," he called. When he turned around, Max was gone. Ben's heart skipped a beat. He spun in place, expecting to see his furry companion darting through the bushes. But there was no sign of him. "Max," he called, his voice echoing through the trees. Silence. Panic started creeping in. Max never wandered far. He always stayed close. Where had he gone? Meanwhile, Max was running through the forest, his little paws kicking up dirt as he chased after a rabbit that had darted past him. His instincts had taken over, and he had followed the small creature deeper into the trees. But as soon as the rabbit disappeared into a thicket, Max stopped, panting. He lifted his head, ears perking up. He expected to hear Ben's voice calling him back. But the woods were quiet. Too quiet. Max turned in circles, sniffing the air. Everything smelled unfamiliar. His heart began to race. Where was Ben? Where was home? Fear crept into his little body. He barked, hoping Ben would hear him. No response. Max ran in one direction, then another, trying to find a familiar scent, a recognizable trail, anything that would lead him back. But the more he ran, the more lost he became. The trees all looked the same, stretching endlessly in every direction. His paws felt heavier with each step, and the sky above began to darken as the sun dipped lower. Back at the creek, Ben was frantic. He searched every bush, every tree, calling Max's name over and over. "Max, where are you, buddy?" Tears stung his eyes. Max had never been lost before. He was always so good at following Ben, staying close. This wasn't like him. Ben ran back toward home, hoping maybe Max had already found his way there. But when he burst into the backyard, his parents looked at him with confusion. "Where's Max?" his mother asked. Ben shook his head, struggling to catch his breath. I don't know. He was right behind me. And then he was just gone." His father's face turned serious. "We need to go back and look for him." They grabbed flashlights, and within minutes, Ben and his parents were back in the forest, calling Max's name. But the forest was vast, and night was quickly approaching. Max, now shivering, curled up beneath a fallen log. The forest that had once been so exciting now felt enormous and terrifying. The sounds of owls hooting, twigs snapping, and leaves rustling in the wind made him tuck his tail between his legs. But Max wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't. Ben was out there somewhere. Taking a deep breath, Max stood up and sniffed the air again. He knew Ben's scent, and if he could just find it, he could find his way home. One paw in front of the other, he began to move again. Somewhere out there, Ben was searching for him. And no matter what, Max would find his way back. Max had never felt so alone. The darkness of the forest wrapped around him like a thick, endless blanket, and every rustling sound sent shivers down his spine. His paws ached from wandering, and his nose twitched, desperately searching for a familiar scent. But nothing smelled like home. Nothing smelled like Ben. The little dog let out a whimper, curling up beneath a fallen tree. exhaustion sinking into his bones. He had been so sure he could find his way back. But the trees all looked the same. The path was gone. Hope was slipping away. Then, suddenly, a soft breeze stirred the leaves around him. It wasn't like the cold, eerie wind that had been howling through the trees all night. This one was different. Gentle. Warm. Almost comforting. Max lifted his head. A faint glow appeared through the trees. A light so soft and shimmering that it hardly seemed real. At first, Max thought his tired eyes were playing tricks on him. But then, as the glow moved closer, he saw it. A deer. But not just any deer. Its coat was pure white. Almost silver under the moonlight. And its eyes shimmered like stars. It stepped forward, moving without fear, without hesitation. It was calm, graceful, and it was staring right at Max. The little dog froze. He had seen deer before. But they had always been shy, running at the first sign of him. This one didn't run. It didn't even flinch. Instead, it tilted its head, as if studying him. Then, it turned and began to walk away. Max watched, confused. Then, the deer stopped and looked back at him. A message. A silent invitation. Come. Max hesitated, but something deep inside him, a feeling he couldn't explain, told him to follow. So he did. The deer moved soundlessly through the trees. Its glowing coat barely making a sound as it passed through the underbrush. Max trotted behind, his paws suddenly feeling lighter, his fear slowly fading. He didn't know why, but he trusted this creature. It was leading him somewhere, and he had no choice but to believe it was somewhere good. The deeper they went, the stranger the forest became. The trees seemed taller, their branches arching overhead like a cathedral. Fireflies danced in the air, casting tiny golden sparks of light. The ground felt soft beneath Max's paws, and the scent of fresh earth and pine filled his nose. It was almost as if the forest itself had changed, becoming something more alive, more magical. The deer moved steadily, never looking back again. It didn't need to. Max was right behind it, his trust growing with every step. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the deer stopped. Max skidded to a halt, his heart pounding. The deer lifted its head and exhaled, sending out a warm breath that swirled into the air like mist. Then, as if made of the very wind itself, the deer turned and vanished into the night. Max blinked, and then he heard it. Max! A voice. Ben's voice. Max's ears shot up. He turned wildly, his nose sniffing the air. And there it was, the scent he had been searching for. Familiar and warm and safe. He barked, loud, desperate. Then, crashing through the trees, he ran, faster than he had ever run before. And then, through the thick brush, he saw him, Ben. Tears streaked the boy's dirt-covered face, his flashlight casting frantic beams of light through the trees. Max! Ben sobbed, dropping to his knees as the little dog launched into his arms. Max licked Ben's face furiously, his tail wagging so hard it hurt. He nuzzled into Ben's chest, letting out small, happy whimpers. He was home, he had found his way back. Or maybe, he had been led back. Ben buried his face in Max's fur, holding him as tightly as he could. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. Max let out a soft huff, as if to say, "I thought I was lost too." Behind them, the forest was silent again. The fireflies had faded, and the air felt normal once more. And though neither of them could see it, deep in the trees, a pair of glowing eyes watched them for just a moment longer. Then, with a final breath of the wind, the presence was gone. Max had never been this deep in the forest before. Every tree, every shadow felt unfamiliar, but somehow, he wasn't afraid. The glowing white deer led him forward with slow, graceful steps, moving as if it belonged to another world entirely. There was something about it, something calming, something almost magical. Max had lost all sense of time. Had he been walking for minutes? Hours? The forest around him no longer felt like the one he had played in with Ben. The trees were taller here, their thick branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. A soft mist curled around the ground, swirling gently around Max's paws. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was simply there, as if the forest itself were breathing. Despite not knowing where he was going, Max felt lighter with each step. It was as if the fear and exhaustion from being lost had faded. He should have been terrified, wandering alone in an unknown place. But the deer's presence gave him confidence. A quiet assurance that he was safe. The deer didn't look back. Yet Max knew it was aware of him. It moved with purpose, stepping carefully over fallen logs and weaving between thick tree trunks. Max followed without hesitation, his paws making almost no sound against the soft earth. He didn't understand how, but it was as if something greater was guiding him, making sure he wouldn't trip or lose his way. As they walked, the forest around them shifted. The towering trees grew farther apart, revealing small pockets of glowing flowers, their petals shimmering softly in the dim light. The wind carried a faint whisper, a melody that wasn't quite a song but felt familiar, comforting. Max's ears perked up. He couldn't tell if he was imagining it or if the forest truly was alive in a way he had never noticed before. They crossed a shallow stream where the water sparkled like tiny stars. Max hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the cool water. His reflection rippled beneath him. But strangely, he didn't feel wet. The moment his paws touched the surface, it was as if the water had accepted him, allowing him to pass without resistance. On the other side, the deer waited, patient as ever. Max shook himself off out of habit, though he didn't feel any dampness, and trotted forward again. The deeper they went, the more Max realized that he was no longer just following the deer, he was trusting it. Whatever force had brought this creature to him, whatever magic was surrounding them, he understood now that it was leading him home. For the first time since he had been separated from Ben, Max let go of his fear. He stopped questioning how far they had traveled or how much longer the journey would take. Instead, he simply walked, his heart steady, his steps light. The deer finally slowed as they reached a clearing bathed in silver light. The mist parted, revealing something Max had not expected. A path. It was faint, covered with leaves and barely visible. But it was there, and it smelled familiar. Max's heart leapt. This was the way home. The deer, standing at the edge of the clearing, turned toward Max. For the first time since they had started their journey, it met his eyes directly. A moment passed between them, silent, deep, full of understanding. Then, as softly as the wind that had carried it here, the deer turned and stepped back into the trees. Max watched as its glowing figure faded, dissolving into the shadows like a dream. But he didn't feel sad. He knew what he had to do now. With one final glance at the path ahead, Max took a deep breath and ran. He ran toward home. The backyard, and the soft light spilling from the windows filled Max with a joy so overwhelming that he barely noticed the deer stopping behind him. He turned for just a moment, looking back at the strange and magical creature that had guided him. The white deer stood at the edge of the trees, its silver coat shimmering under the moonlight. Its eyes, deep and knowing, met Max's one last time. No words were spoken, but Max understood. It had led him home. A soft breeze rustled the trees, and in the blink of an eye, the deer was gone, fading into the mist as if it had never been there. But Max knew it had been real. He knew something beyond his understanding had watched over him, had guided him when he was lost. But now, there was only one thing left to do: run. His paws hit the soft earth as he sprinted toward the house, his breath coming in excited huffs. The night air was crisp, the scent of home stronger than ever. His tail wagged wildly as he rushed forward. And then, he heard it. Max! Ben's voice. Max let out a bark, loud, desperate, full of love. Through the dim evening light, Ben appeared, standing just outside the house, his flashlight shaking in his hands. His face, streaked with dried tears, lit up with pure shock and joy. "Max!" Ben shouted, running forward. Max didn't slow down. He launched himself straight into Ben's arms, nearly knocking him over. Ben wrapped his arms around Max, holding him tightly, burying his face in the dog's fur. "You're back," Ben choked out, his voice thick with emotion. I thought I lost you." Max licked Ben's face furiously, letting out soft whimpers as if to say, "I missed you too. I'm home." Ben's parents ran out moments later, their faces filled with relief. "Oh my gosh, Max," Emily gasped, kneeling beside them. "We thought we'd never see you again." Tom let out a deep breath, patting Max's head. "That's one lucky dog," he said with a chuckle, though his voice was thick with emotion. Or maybe something was looking out for him. Ben held onto Max for what felt like forever, afraid to let go, afraid that if he did, Max might disappear again. But Max wasn't going anywhere. He was home, inside. They wrapped Max in a warm blanket, gave him food, and checked him for injuries. But aside from being tired, he was perfectly fine, just happy to be back where he belonged. As they sat together, Ben told his parents everything. "I swear, something led him back. I mean, he was lost for so long." And then, Ben hesitated, eyes filled with wonder. "It's crazy, but I think something guided him home." Emily smiled softly, brushing Ben's hair back. "Sometimes, the world works in mysterious ways." Tom nodded. Maybe there are things we can't explain. But what matters is that Max is safe. Ben looked down at Max, who was curled up beside him, already drifting to sleep. He ran his fingers through his fur, feeling the warmth of his best friend beside him. He didn't need to explain it. He didn't need proof. He believed. The days that followed were full of love and joy. Max stayed close to Ben's side, never wandering too far, as if he, too, never wanted to be separated again. They played in the yard, ran through the fields, and fell asleep under the big oak tree, just as they always had. But sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet and the wind whispered through the trees, Ben would glance toward the forest. And for just a second, he swore he could see something, a soft glow, a fleeting figure, a presence watching over them, a reminder that magic exists, that miracles happen, and that some friendships, like his and Max's, are meant to last forever.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.